Go ahead and take their seats. We'll get started. Thank you. All right, well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Stephen Ezel. I am the Vice President of Global Innovation Policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. We are a Washington, D.C.-based technology and economic policy think tank whose mission is to advocate for public policies that drive innovation-based economic growth in the United States, in our states, and in countries around the world. Well, it's cold outside, but it's exciting to see that innovation and competitiveness remain such a hot topic inside the halls of Congress. And ITIF wants to sincerely say thank you and our deepest appreciation to the Senate Competitiveness Caucus for co-hosting this event today called From 10th to 1st, Improving U.S. Innovation and Global Competitiveness. We'll talk about those topics shortly, but first, I would like to introduce the co-founder and co-chair of the Senate Competitiveness Caucus, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator Coons is really one of the country's foremost leading voices and advocates for American innovation, education, and competitiveness. After 10 years of service to Delaware's largest county, the citizens of Delaware elected Mr. Coons to the Senate in 2010, where he serves on the Senate Appropriations, Foreign Relations, Judiciary, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and Ethics Committees. While I know those are illustrious appointments, I think the two activities with which Mr. Senator Coons is most excited on the Hill is being co-chair of the Senate Competitiveness Caucus and also an honorary co-chair to the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. So thank you for that, and welcome, Senator.
Well, thank you, Stephen. Thank you to ITIF, and thank you to all the folks who've invested some of your time this afternoon in coming to hear the summary and the outcome of this compelling report about competitiveness and what the drivers are that will allow the United States to return to its leading global position. We've got an amazing panel, and I'm grateful that Senator Gardner and hopefully soon Senator Moran and I will have the opportunity on behalf of the Competitiveness Caucus to kick off this fourth event for the caucus this year. Stephen, I've had a great opportunity to work with ITIF, both as the honorary co-chair and as a participant in a number of your conferences. I've known you and Rob Atkinson for many years, and just want to start by saying thank you, because ITIF is a essential, vital, and needed contributor to deliberation and conversation in Washington around what are the choices that we need to make in policy in order for our country to continue to be a growing economy and in order to regain our position globally. One of the things that I thought most struck me about this report as it assesses the success, how's that for a great phrase to say, as it assesses the success of 56 countries and their innovation policies, is that it looked not just at how those countries' national policies contributed to their own internal domestic GDP, but how they contributed to international innovation. I thought it was a fascinating mix of factors, 14 contributing and 13 detracting, and I thought it was a compelling analysis and something I know you will all be interested in hearing more about in just a few moments. In my view, the nation that brought the world the assembly line, the automobile, the iPhone, thousands of inventions that have made modern life possible worldwide, can surely do better than 10th. We come up in their ranking as the 10th in the world, and I'm interested in what it is that we can do together, Senator, in a bipartisan way, to make sure that we are building back towards first. Making greater investments in research and development, making wiser investments in human capital, reducing our effective corporate tax rate, and ensuring that businesses can compete fairly around the world. One of the very first bills that I did as a then new senator with Senator Jerry Moran, cue Senator Moran off stage left, ladies and gentlemen, was the Startup Act, which included a whole range of important provisions around IP, around immigration, around tax, around the whole suite of policy areas that could help jumpstart innovation and competitiveness. Today, you've got 4 panelists who will talk in much greater detail about what it is that we could be doing in a bipartisan way as some of the 11 senators who are bipartisan members of this Competitiveness Caucus to keep making progress along the trajectory towards being a stronger country. We've got Hamilton Moses, who has great experience as a neurologist and consultant who brings business and medical expertise. Mark Seeger, CTO of Technical Computing Group at Intel, who is an alum of Lawrence Livermore, and as is the case with anyone who's worked at a national lab, impresses me just by the fact that he breathes, let alone speaks. David Williams, Dean of the College of Engineering at Ohio State, and Vedanta Yusupov, my own home state champion and friend from Delaware, who runs the Fraunhofer Institute. I know they will be introduced in more detail, but I just wanted to briefly thank the members of the panel for what they're going to be saying about how we can make our economy more competitive globally. The report you're about to hear about has a whole series of suggestions. The challenge for us is to find a path forward to turn them into action, to actually turn them into legislation that's going to lead to better trained workers, to more high-tech manufacturing, to a more supportive regulatory and tax environment. I'm grateful for the opportunity to welcome you and to thank my colleagues, both the senator from Colorado and the senator from Kansas, for their engagement in this caucus, and to encourage you to be in touch with my office and their offices and with the caucus as you come out of this session today with stronger and better proposals for what we can do together to make sure that America remains competitive. Thank you very much.
Is this right? Yep.
All right. Next, we're delighted to have the pleasure of having Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado with us. He was elected to the United States Senate in 2014 after 6 years in the Colorado House of Representatives. Senator Gardner's committee assignments include energy and national resources, commerce, science and transportation, and small business and entrepreneurship, and foreign relations, and I think most importantly, driving innovation in Colorado and the United States. Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to ITIF for hosting this, along with Senator Coons, Jerry Moran, for your work in the Competitiveness Caucus. And I apologize, I've got to be heading back to the floor. A bill that I've been working on dealing with North Korea is being debated right now, so I'm going to have to leave and return to the floor. But I think it's important to point out some of the activities that have taken place in the Kennedy Caucus Room. The history of this room is deep and significant. If you think about some of the hearings throughout our history, we grew up learning about things like the Teapot Dome scandal. The hearings on that were right here in this room. The Titanic hearings were right here in this room. But there's another hearing that addresses the issue of innovation. And that was, lo and behold, on the morning of December 7th, 1941, there was a conversation. A couple of off-duty airmen were working at a new thing called a radar station. And they were looking at the screen, and just kind of a new technology that emerged, and they saw the blips on the screen, and they said, hey, this may be something, we don't know, this is new technology. And they found out later, of course, that that was the start of World War II. But the fact is this, that innovation has greatly changed and dramatically changed the world as we know it today. Radar has gone from a military application to all kinds of commercial applications and fundamentally transformed who we are as a country. It's that innovation and competition, indeed the world, innovation and competition that has sparked new generations for throughout this country's history. Senator Coons and I look forward to working with you on ideas ranging from how we can be more competitive in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, fields to renewable energy. We've worked together on energy savings performance contracts, which we tried to put on a bumper sticker. But the problem is it actually created less energy efficiency in the car with that long of a bumper sticker. And so we've also been working together, though, in the Senate on some things like the America Competes reauthorization. Because I believe the United States is losing ground to competitors. Not only around the globe, we're losing competitors in the fields of mathematics, science, technology. We're losing to those competitors. We're losing the computer science advantage that we have. And we have to do more to keep our country ahead of these fields. And that's why when it comes to the American Competes reauthorization that we were working on, it's so critically important. The American Competes reauthorization is the basic federal reauthorization for research programs and many of the STEM programs that we have throughout the federal government. It was last reauthorized in 2010, but it's been expired since 2013. Senator Thune, chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, tapped Senator Peters of Michigan and I to lead a new Competes reauthorization, an effort that we've had months of exciting discussions and roundtables and hearings about how we can best incentivize federal research and keep America competitive. Since early last year, Senator Peters and I have held a series of roundtables focused on basic research, STEM education, and tech transfer, and had dozens of meetings to discuss these issues. As U.S. companies increasingly rely on basic federal research, it's important that we maximize the effectiveness of Competes-related programs. And so over the past several months, we've held multiple roundtables with our national laboratories, with universities, with scientists, leaders, student advocates, and we want to hear more ideas, your ideas, their ideas, about reducing administrative burdens, improving commercialization of research-backed technologies, diversifying the STEM workforce, and other priorities. When you hear from a scientist who says they spend 40% of their grant dollars and their grant time on trying to comply with the terms of the grant, maybe we're not being as efficient as we could be or should be. And so I look forward to continuing these discussions to making America compete. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Senator Gardner. Now we have the pleasure of hearing from Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas. He is with Senator Coons, the co-chair of the Senate Competitiveness Caucus.
Thank you very much.
Thank you much.
You're very welcome. Welcome, everyone. The welcome and our expression of gratitude for your presence here, and our thanks to ITIF for their leadership in this particular meeting of our caucus probably has been overstated. I would be the third one to say thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentation. I just would tell you that I think this is a critical aspect of what Congress should and can do. Chris and I got interested in innovation and technology and in our efforts at the Startup Act. At least in my view, the way this came about was I was so frustrated with the inability of Congress and the President to deal with the economy that maybe there are some niches, significant and important aspects of the economy that we could reach consensus on and agreement on among Republicans and Democrats. And I had no interest in serving in the United States Senate if the plan was to do nothing. And for a long period of time, that seemed to be the outcome, if not the goal. And so we began looking for ways in which those of us who want to have accomplishments on behalf of the country and our states, and those who have a desire beyond just Republican and Democrat politics and being in the United States Senate, could find areas of common agreement and work hard to try to accomplish things on behalf of our economy. And as I say, as Chris indicated, we started with something now called Startup 3.0, dealing with many of the aspects that the Competitive Caucus has expressed as its goal, particularly as it related to tax reform, related to research, related to talent, trying to bring together folks who had an interest in those things in hopes that we could grow our economy and in a sense, more than a sense, and make sure the American dream is alive and well. And I see what is taking place today, what the Competitive Caucus's goal is. We're really about the American dream, giving people the chance in our country who have a desire to create, to manufacture, to pursue their goals in life, the opportunity in America to do so. And so we're delighted of your interest. We're appreciative of you and your members, your United States senators, allowing you the opportunity to join us. And without delay, I guess I should mention Made in America and legislation that we have introduced this past week, now endorsed by ITIF. Thank you very much. And it's designed to continue the practice and the goal of having communities, local and state governments, universities, and manufacturers be able to combine their efforts, cooperate with an end result of increasing manufacturing made in America. So thank you for your interest in this topic. Welcome, and we look forward to results in addition to information. Thank you.
You know, I guess we're going to have to start calling the Senate class of 2010 really the Innovation and Competitiveness class, with it bringing Senators Coons and Moran to Congress. I think that's a real win for the American people.
See you at South by South.
We look for the booth there. So at this point, I'll take about 10 minutes to introduce ITIF's report called Contributors and Detractors, Ranking Countries' Impact on Global Innovation, and then we'll hear from our panelists with about 5 minutes of remarks each. So as Senator Coons suggested, What ITIF's report does is assess 56 countries on 27 indicators of the extent to which their economic, trade, and innovation policies on a per capita basis are doing the most to contribute to or detract from global innovation. The report looks at 14 distinct contributions indicators and 13 detractions indicators, which I will introduce in a minute. But what that strategy enabled us to do was to produce a score for countries on their overall net impact to global innovation, and then how much their policies specifically were contributing or detracting. Before getting to the results, I wanted to share why ITIF wrote this type of report. Fundamentally, we believe that the world is not producing as much innovation as is possible or as is needed. And if global society is going to tackle the challenge of tomorrow, from aging to climate change to resource scarcity to pandemics, we're simply going to have to produce more innovation globally. Unfortunately, innovation policy is still largely conceived of in terms of how it impacts a country's own national economic growth. And not always is enough attention given to how one country's economic and trade policies create positive spillovers or negative externalities that affect other countries throughout the world. And finally, a number of studies, like the 2015 Global Innovation Index from the World Economic Forum, have done a good job of ranking how well countries are doing at innovation outputs and innovation performance. But no one has ever really looked at the impacts of one country's innovation policies on another. And that's what we wanted to set out to do with this report. And the reason why doing so is extremely important is this. Countries in their pursuit of innovation-based economic growth and greater competitiveness can introduce policies that either generate positive impacts for the country itself as well as for the rest of the world, or they can implement negative-sum or mercantilist policies that do in fact help one country win, but they cause everybody else to lose. And therefore, they ratchet down the quality of global competition and leave all nations worse off. So here in this chart, you can imagine what we call good policies, such as when nations invest in scientific research, in greater levels of educational attainment, when they put in place strong digital and physical infrastructures, when they put in place good innovation-incenting tax policies. Those policies help a country win, but they enable new knowledge and new science to come into the world that creates benefits for everyone. So if Genentech develops a cure for cancer, Americans benefit, but citizens throughout the world do as well. In contrast, countries can put in place ugly policies, things like using export subsidies, manipulating currency or standards, saying to a country's enterprises, if you want to sell in our markets like China, you have to manufacture here as a condition of market access. Localization barriers to trade. Countries that say to Google and Facebook, you can't be in our markets unless you locate data centers here. That'll help a country grow, but it'll cause everybody else to lose. We can imagine bad innovation policies. For example, the taxes and tariffs that Brazil puts in place on information and communication technology products are about 17% in total. Now, Brazil does this because it thinks if we put high tariffs on incoming ICTs into the country, we can spur creation of an indigenous semiconductor and information technology manufacturing industry in Brazil. But the result is that all companies and enterprises in Brazil have to use more expensive or inferior ICT tools. And we estimate that these 17% taxes and tariffs actually cost Brazilian economic growth 2 percentage points a year. So it's policy that they think will help it, but it ends up hurting the country. Finally, we can imagine what we call self-destructive innovation policies. These are policies a country puts in place that actually hurt the country but benefit everybody else in the world. Unfortunately, we see this all too often in the United States. So when we say to the best and brightest from around the world, come and study in our universities and we'll educate you, but then we make it difficult for you to stay in America after you graduate, that's a policy that hurts us, helps everybody else. So the point of this and of the report is that we want policymakers to move to this upper left-hand quadrant of good policies around innovation. So the three categories of contributions indicator the report looks at are taxes, human capital, and R&D and technology. So under taxes, these are things like effective corporate tax rate levels, levels of R&D tax credit generosity. Human capital looks at expenditures on education, top-ranking universities, scientists, graduates, and researchers in an economy. And then R&D and technology looks mainly at how much countries are investing in research and development. Three categories of detractors the report looks at are balkanized production markets. This is essentially barriers to trade that countries put in place, like non-tariff barriers or localization barriers to trade. We look at IP protections and the quality of the IP environment countries put forward for the protection of innovative ideas. And finally, we look at balkanized consumer markets, things such as tariffs on ICT products or services trade restrictions. So when we put these 27 indicators together, what do we find? We find that overall, Finland, Sweden, United Kingdom, Singapore, and Holland lead the world in terms of implementing the policies that do the most to contribute to global innovation and the least to detract from it. The United States ranks 10th overall. In terms of detractions, we rank 17th. In terms of contributions, we rank 17th, and in terms of detractions, we rank 6th. Now, I want to stress, this does not mean that the United States is not producing more innovation on an absolute basis than other countries around the world. Yes, we do remain the world's leading funder of science and technology. So do not interpret this in absolute terms. It should be seen in relative terms on a per capita basis, what nations are doing as a share of their economy to contribute to the global innovation system. Just point out the bottom 5 countries were Ukraine, Thailand, India, Indonesia, and Argentina. To give you a sense of where countries plot relative to one another, this scatter plot shows all the countries, all 56, and you should read it as contributions on the vertical axis here and detractions on contributions on the horizontal axis and detractions on the vertical axis. Again, I want to point out the US scores relatively well up here in the upper right corner. The reason, though, we come in 10th overall is we don't score quite as strongly as some of the countries we call Schumpeterians in the report, like Finland, the United Kingdom, and Sweden, which are doing more per capita as a share of their economy. The report also identifies a set of countries called innovation mercantilists, which are down here in this lower left-hand quadrant. And these are nations that are implementing below average numbers of good or beneficial policies for the world, but an above average number of harmful policies. Looking at US ranks in the 6 key indicator categories, we rank 4th in human capital, 10th in R&D and technology, and just 49th in terms of implementing an innovation incenting tax system. The primary reason the US only ranks 10th in R&D technology is that we have a relatively faltering share of government investment in scientific research. Latest data from the OECD shows that we are just 10th among OECD countries in national R&D intensity, and the share of government investment in R&D as a share of GDP. In terms of tax systems, the US actually invented the research and development tax credit in 1981, and up until 1992, we had the world's most generous R&D tax credit, but today it has fallen to just 27th. So essentially, our tax code has become relatively less globally competitive in terms of incenting innovation. And for those reasons, that's why we rank 17th overall in these contributions indicators. We score much better in detractions. The only place we don't do as well is on these balkanized production markets, and frankly, that's primarily a result of policies like the Buy America Act, which introduced introduces barriers to trade in the United States. The report identifies 5 specific steps the United States could implement to become #1 for contributions and #1 overall in the report. Specifically first, if we reduced our effective corporate tax rate from 27.7 to 18.2%, of the 56 countries, the United States ranks 49th in terms of effective corporate tax rate. So that's not even looking at base rate, that's effective. In fact, the United States is the only country in the OECD which has not decreased its base corporate tax rate since the year 2000. And over the past 16 years, the average OECD rate has come down 22%. We could increase our R&D tax credit from 14 to 24% to make it more generous. We should implement an innovation box. This is a tax instrument which essentially taxes the profits that companies earn from newly introduced intellectual property at a lower rate. The goal there is to move companies from not just investing in research, but also giving them a tax credit to bring new products, technologies, and ideas to the marketplace. We could increase government funding of university R&D by close to $70 billion per year. Now that may seem like a lot, but if we did that, we would actually bring back federal investment in research and development to the level it was at in 1983. So to invest today as much as a share of GDP, we would need a $70 billion increase. And finally, we can increase the number of tertiary graduates in scientific, technology, engineering, and math by 20%. Make those 5 changes, and we're #1 overall in the world in this report. So finally, what ITIF works on every day is making sure that America gets what we call the 4 T's right. That's tax, talent, technology, and trade. For the reality is that both the public and the private sector have to work together to ensure a competitive American economy. It's the investments that government makes in scientific research, in educational attainment, in deploying digital and physical infrastructures, as well as putting in place technology transfer and commercialization policies, as well as the types of tax policies and regulatory systems that government puts in place that informs the landscape and the national innovation ecosystem upon which the private sector enterprise of the United States competes. You can't have a competitive economy if both aren't working hand in hand. And that's why we're so fortunate to have the Senate Competitiveness Caucus working on these issues, and it's why we're fortunate as well to have a great panel today. Let me introduce them, and we will turn it over for about 5 minutes of remarks, and then we'll go to Q&A. So first, we're going to hear from Dr. David Williams. Dr. Williams is the Executive Dean of the Professional Colleges and the Dean of Engineering at Ohio State University. Dr. Williams oversees the education of more than 10,000 undergraduate and graduate students. He leads a research program that invests $120 million annually, and he is involved in numerous university industry economic development partnerships. Next, we'll hear from Mark Seeger. Mark is an Intel Fellow in the Data Center Group and the Chief Technology Officer for Intel's Technical Computing Group. His work focuses on the development, deployment, and use of exascale, high-performance computing systems that represent the future of supercomputing. Mark joined Intel from the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, bringing 28 years of experience in parallel computer processing. We will then hear from Dr. Vedadi Yusupov, who has been the executive director with the Fraunhofer USA Center for Molecular Biotechnology since its launch in Delaware in 2001. Dr. Yusupov is an internationally recognized expert in plant-based biopharmaceutical development, and he has been involved in various aspects of plant molecular biology and molecular farming since 1985. Finally, we'll hear from Dr. Hamilton Moses, who is a neurologist, management consultant, and author. In 2002, he founded Aileron Advisors, which serves corporate and foundation boards. He is an adjunct professor of neurology at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and he writes frequently on technology, policy, and global competitiveness in biomedical research. So with that, Dr. Williams, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me repeat one of the lines that you just saw. The government should increase the funding of R&D at U.S. universities by $68 billion. Yay. Now, why should we do that? I think it's still a solid claim that the United States research universities lead the world in terms of raw innovation, risk-taking, IP production, and talent creation. Across our universities today, there are tens of thousands of independent R&D programs led by tens of thousands of professors. There are millions of transient learners who pick up the new knowledge created by those professors and integrate it with knowledge that we already have. We call them students. There are tens of millions of wealthy, interested, and committed external networks that we call alumni. And together, those three organizations account for the innovation, the research that in past decades has driven this country to where it once was at the top of the innovation chain. So we need to get back there again. And I think what is particularly important is to recognize how that investment in R&D has helped change the country. The iPhone 6 was mentioned. Okay? And when I ask Siri who invented the internet, and she tells me that it was ARPA funding back in 1969, when we learned that back in the 1960s, research created more transparent silica glass. But it was only 20 years later that federally funded research invented photonic crystals, and you put all those three together, and we have the internet, we have the dot-com boom, we have optical fibers, we have everything that we do today. And you can point to federally funded research at every stage of that particular process. You can throw in touch screens, multi-gesture screens, you can throw in hard drives, lithium batteries. All of these can be traced to federally funded research at US universities. The universities do their own investments too. University of Wisconsin has a $2.5 billion endowment at WARF, which was built on the creation of warfarin, the drug, which leads innovation at that fine land-grant university. Like most research universities, we at Ohio State have a whole range of programs to encourage innovation in our students. We teach them how to innovate in the classroom. We teach them hands-on engineering. We encourage our faculty to create IP by changing the tenure regulations. We create facilities for the support of early-stage and startup companies. Last year, we spun out over 50 companies from our one university alone. We're changing our approach to IP to be much more industry-friendly in our partnerships. We're integrating economic development with corporate outreach, and we're rewarding faculty innovations with early tenure. So all of that has built on decades of high-end federal funding. And without the ongoing federal funding of blue sky research for more transparent glass fibers, of applied research like voice-activated assistants, without that spread of fundamental and applied research, the innovation pipeline will dry up. And future generations of students will not know what they could have invented. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to talk a little bit today about why this innovation matters. And the example I'll use is one that has been the baseline for my career, is that it takes a lot of government investment to innovate an HPC, and that HPC investment then turns around and becomes a huge driver for economic benefit. This is the top 500 list. This is sort of the list that everybody goes to find out who's got the biggest system on the planet and how fast that technology is evolving. It's, the list started back in 1993, and over the past 23 years has witnessed a growth in delivered performance on the LIMPAC benchmark of over $500 million. That represents a transformation that no other industry on the planet has witnessed. And we're standing at the dawn of the next generation of supercomputer technology called exascale, and that change is about to go up by another factor of about 3,000 in the next 5 to 10 years. So Edward Dijkstra, a computer scientist, coined the phrase that a quantitative difference in computing power is also a qualitative difference if the quantitative difference is greater than an order of magnitude. So what does this mean? Here's a transportation example. 1 mile per hour is basically the speed of a baby crawling across a living room. 10 miles an hour is the top speed of a marathon runner. I run a little bit slower than that myself. 100 miles an hour is the speed of a fast automobile, and I'd like to drive my S2000 at that speed every once in a while. 1,000 miles an hour is, notionally the speed of a fast jetliner. The qualitative ramifications are affecting our lives today. Driving at, something less than 100 miles an hour allows people to go places they could not reach by foot. I live on a ranch about 50 miles from the Intel facility in Santa Clara. If I had to ride my horse there, it would take me 3 days. By driving in the car, I do it in 45 minutes when there's no traffic. Flying in an airplane got me here today, so I could be here for a meeting and fly home tomorrow. If I had to go across country on foot, that would take, several weeks. So what does this mean, really, in terms of innovation? What it means in terms of innovation, sitting at the petascale about to go into exascale, is that we see a fundamental transformation in the scientific method. And that transformation is taking us from the scientific method being based on theory and experiment to one where it is based on theory, experiment, and predictive simulation capability. So what does that really mean? When was the last time the scientific method changed by this big amount? It was actually 407 years ago in 1609 when Galileo invented the first telescope. So that, we're talking about half a millennia here. That's the kind of time it takes for this size of a revolution to take place. And when Galileo invented the telescope, then what he basically did was extend the human ability to perceive, his eye in this case, and trained it on the heavens and figured out that there were moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn, and from that completely changed cosmology and man's place in the universe. That started the current way of thinking in the scientific method, and all of the experimental apparatus that the DOE and other scientific endeavors fund is an outgrowth of this. So if the scientific method is really changing, there ought to be an economic impact, an economic benefit that you can measure demonstrating that huge impact. And so the DOE funded an IDC report recently. It came out in 2014. And what they found is that in early results from this study found was that for every dollar invested in HPC, and back on that Moore's Law curve, about every 3 dots is a phase transition to the next generation system. Those systems costs started at about $32 million down at the lower left and are about somewhere between $180 and $250 million at the top, with about $1 billion R&D investment to get there. So when we're talking about $1 invested, that returns about $365 in revenue back to corporations, and the profits from that revenue for every dollar invested is about $38.7. That's a huge ROI, absolutely stunning. The average number of years before you see that return on investment is a short, just slightly less than 2 years. And the average HPC investment per innovation is about $3.1 million. So even though the investment level is humongous, the number of innovations going on here is really quite large. And if you think about innovation, technology innovation in a technology-based economy, this really translates into, if you want to outcompete, a country has to out-innovate, and to out-innovate, now you need high-performance computing to do that because it's a fundamental element of the technology development cycle of theory, experiment, and simulation science. So what are we doing? The President signed a directive in 2015 creating the National Supercomputing Initiative. It's led by the three agencies, DOE, DOD, and NSF, and it's trickling this technology into about 5 and growing number of other agencies that are leveraging the technology to change the mission deliverables. And then there are foundational research agencies down at the bottom. And the list of innovation areas that they're going after is quite stunning. And I'll just read through them really quickly here. HPC for predictive and precision medicine for cancer, heart disease, the #1 killer in the U.S., sepsis and pandemic events like Zika. Brain Initiative, creating neuroscience and HPC modeling capability to investigate Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, PTSD, and neuromorphic computing. Bioengineering for industrial scale biofuels and designer medicines. Predictive drug safety. Big data, machine learning, and cybersecurity. Designer materials for better batteries and additive manufacturing. Materials, fuels, and combustion for 100-mile-an-hour engines with lower emissions. Quantification of uncertainty to drive the development of these applications back into programs that improve both theory and experiment to improve the simulation capabilities that these create. This translates into the case of weather, the ability to do 30-day forecasts accurately with 1-kilometer resolution over an entire region like the East Coast. It also is funding and training through the NSF piece of it, the next generation STEM workforce. We're not the only ones investing here. The IDC report also points out that other countries around the world are investing heavily. Naturally, Intel is interested in tracking this, so we do. And I list here the largest ones that are going on currently. India has a $700 million program started this year over 4 years to democratize HPC and deploy over 70 high-end systems that would be in the top 20 of the top 500 list that I showed you earlier, and also create a high-speed network that interlinks all of these institutions together. In terms of where they are on the innovation scale, this is going to change that scatter plot substantially, this program. PRC is a communist country, and they have a 5-year plan driven by the government. The last 5-year plan put them up to be #1 on the top 500 list, which they've been for the last 3 years. In the next 5-year plan, which started this year, they want to get to exascale, and their plan is to do it with 3 different technology tracks. Japan has a flagship 2020 program, which is a $1 billion program to field an exascale platform at Riken in the 2020 timeframe, and their focus is on social and science application. And I don't know whether you guys have tracked what's going on in Japan, but their demographics is such that they're going to go through the aging of their baby boomer generation much sooner than the rest of the world, so they're going to look at that with supercomputing. South Korea is also spending several $100 million to get into the petascale regime. Europe has 2 programs, Horizon 2020 and PRACE, that has already developed the first generation of pre-exascale systems and is on a path to exascale systems by 2020. And Russia, it has a national plan to reinvigorate their HPC and has 7 systems on the top 500 list. So the economic value is not only seen in the US, but is seen by a very wide global community. And I have some more specific use case examples with dollars 100B after them in terms of economic impact out of this IDC report that you can read online later. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark.
I will move into a translational research space and just continue on what was commented. I work for Fraunhofer, and Fraunhofer is an international organization. If anybody knows about Fraunhofer, the whole purpose of Fraunhofer was fill the gap between discoveries, inventions, and applications of them. If you look at today's innovations, taking innovations from discovery to applications, it's a fairly miserable. We do file the patents, but then they die on the vine. And there are a few of the patents, if you look at the percentage of the one reduced to practical uses, are really, really low. Let alone that we are learning that there are many innovations are never been even registered. We really have to recognize what the innovation is. And I could be one of the examples. If I will go back to one of my publications, it could have been a great patent application that could have great economic benefits. So what Fraunhofer has done throughout its history, it worked as a partnership with the universities. It mined the university discoveries and translated them into applications that German car companies or industry has used it. A claimed fame of Fraunhofer is MP3 music decoder. It's an invention that Fraunhofer did, and now we're all enjoying it. If you look at the first version of the MP3 decoder, it's a huge box. If you look at today's versions, they just fingernail type of improvements. And what Fraunhofer has done as a translational research organization to fill the gap is really a tremendous example that we could benefit in United States as well. I mean, when I was at Thomas Jefferson University, when I suggested to university authorities that we need to have a GMP production capacity to conduct human trials, they looked at me as I'm an alien. Now, of course, everybody wants to be in translational research space, but Fraunhofer has been doing it for decades, and the benefits are really vigorous. Another thing, we're looking at how we can utilize the natural resources. If you look at it, sometimes it's really not even an innovation. It's the culture of taking something and implementing it in a practical manner. Everybody knows dandelions, and everybody knows that dandelions can be used for making natural rubber. Fraunhofer is one of the first organizations actually made that natural rubber. Last year, Audi's test in Fraunhofer made tires made out of Fraunhofer rubber. And it's become a multi-billion-dollar business for a car company, but of course it also becomes a substantial economic benefits, research benefits for Fraunhofer. So it really looks at it, how you look at the innovation. You invent something, you patent something, or you take something and implement as a novelty. And if we're looking into the future of biomanufacturing or any manufacturing, it is no longer a 10 years ago's car manufacturing type of approach. I want to see if any of you have been in manufacturing facility, you would see perhaps very few operators. You will see machine-human interfaces more, and maybe one or two operators on the floor. So we're moving into a time when we have to look into where the innovation is driving us and how we can translate them, yet maintain the capability of the humans to have the jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So artificial intelligence, as it's evolving, where are we going to move our innovation and how are we going to maintain sustainability or economic sustainability? So, and translational research, when it comes to Fraunhofer USA, this is extension of Fraunhofer German, really, with the same type of translational attitude. And when DARPA put an accelerated manufacturing of pharmaceuticals as a task, with a task that can anybody take an unknown target and convert it into a usable product in 12 weeks. So there are a number of groups, partnerships initiated, and we were lucky to be one of them. And we're using the plants, as it was mentioned, as a manufacturing technology. And believe it or not, you can do it in a lot less time frame than 12 weeks. You can do it in 4 weeks, okay? So it doesn't mean that you will have the final product, but you really can have this type of technologies. And this was not just a single innovation. It was really assembling a whole number of innovations, bringing in the biology, bringing in the engineering, bringing the software development, all of them combined into one operation unit to make it a less than 1 month's manufacturing facility. So it takes really that translational type of attitude to take a look at it. And but when it comes to what the conversation was started, that in United States, were there places where we could expand on it, I really think that we could enhance the translation research capabilities, true translation research capabilities, and perhaps more partnership with the universities like Fraunhofer has in Germany. There are 69 Fraunhofer institutes in Germany, and each of them is integrated partnership with the university. So university students actually have an access to Fraunhofer institutes, Fraunhofer scientists on a real-time basis. They take classes and they can do research at the institutions. So I'm sure there has been, over the last, at least particularly the last 2 decades, there has been a quite bit of movement into translation research space in the United States as well. There are, at least in biomanufacturing space, there are, I believe Ohio is one of the recipients of the BARDA grants for the manufacturing base. That's a public-private partnerships created. But of course, this can be expanded. What would really help is the sustainability of this funding. As you move from discovery, you translate it, you implement it. As you move, for example, from NIH or DoD territory to BARDA territory, there are still gaps to be filled. And I think industry wouldn't be the best place to look for money at that point. I think having some of the federal programs that will fill that gaps would be tremendous value. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Moses.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about human health. We've moved from engineering on one side of the table to human health on the other, and the problems are really remarkably similar in the two domains. This is a time to be tremendously optimistic about human health, but it's important to realize the history of how we've come to this point. An individual born in 1900 had a life expectancy of about 52 years. Today, life expectancy is 82 years. That accounts for tremendous U.S. competitiveness. And in those countries that have had a similar history, they have also grown economically. Therefore, the proof of the assertion by the Institute that economic competitiveness is driven by basic scientific and other advances is justified by centuries of experience. That, however, has been reversed in this country over the past decade, and particularly for men between the age of 15 and 45, life expectancy has decreased. This is extremely important because, as historians have pointed out recently, the fall of the former Soviet Union and the instability that followed Mao's death in China had in no small measure its origin in declining health of the population. Now, I'm very optimistic, and my perspective is not simply as a physician but and as a hospital executive at one time, but having worked for 2 decades with large international firms, with a global consulting firm, we've seen all of the interstices of competitiveness at a very microscopic level. But recognize that the increase in life expectancy just between 1970 and 1990, that 20-year period, today accounts for about $4 trillion of GDP. Life expectancy, 20 years, increased 1970 to 90. Today, it's $4 trillion of our economy and roughly an $18 trillion economy. A very palpable effect. However, the gestation period is long. I would envy a return on investment in 2 or 3 years. In medicine, it's 15 to 25, and not shortening. One of the big surprises in my career that began in the 1970s is that it is not really taking any shorter a time today to produce new medications or new operations or new medical devices than it did decades ago. And again, emblematic of that is a finding that illustrates this point beautifully, just published a few weeks ago. Schizophrenia, devastating disease, usually occurs in late adolescence or in the 20s. 1% of the population in every country, developed, developing, rich, or poor, 1% of everyone on the globe, it's estimated, has schizophrenia. A remarkable study that required patient samples from 100,000 individuals from 12 countries involving over 20 institutions, about 60 investigators, organized through both public and private monies, found an astonishing link to the complement system, which is not known to have very much at all to do with the brain, but is thought primarily to deal with blood clotting and how we fend off infections. The basic work that was done with the help of a good deal of supercomputing was the Human Genome Project, which reached its draft sequence exactly 15 years ago. So that gestation period of 15 years is one of the major obstacles that we face. How to shorten that is undoubtedly going to require more than just money. But money is necessary. And since the easiest policy lever that can be used by any government or any company in its allocation of resources is a financial one. I won't bore you with this. It's all been published by our group and colleagues from the Boston Consulting Group last year in the Journal of the AMA a year ago this month. But a couple of high spots. First of all, biomedical research in this country is $120 billion. That's fallen from about 57% of global spending to now 43% during the last 10 years. So that at least in biomedical research, we are not the world's leader any longer in research funding. Now that's all public and private. Public meaning appropriated by the federal government primarily, most notably the National Institutes of Health, but also some state governments. That accounts for about 30% of the total. But industry accounts for 65% of the total, and that's not generally appreciated. 2/3 of the funding of biomedical research in this country, and about 60% of that in the world, is from private industry. Only 5% comes from public charities like the American Cancer Society or the Heart Association, or private foundation like the Howard Hughes Medical Institutes or the Gates Foundations. The federal share, that 30%, is very important. And it has been flat for the past decade after a period of doubling in inflation-adjusted terms between the mid-1990s and mid-2000. Private spending by industry has dipped slightly over the past 2 years, but most significantly, that investment has become short-term, 3 to 5 year allocations of their expenditures. Not nearly the 15 to 25 years required in order to bring a basic discovery to market. There are many reasons for that we don't have time to go into today, but the crying need, in addition to organizational ways of improving our competitiveness internationally through the organization of research, is to establish long-term pools of investable money for basic studies that can be directly applied. Long-term meaning in increments of 10 years, ideally 10 to 15. Now, how could that occur? To be practical. Again, all of this has been suggested in print with, I must say, a disconcerting lack of interest in the suggestions, at least until the last year. One thought is to create incentives for the repatriation of foreign holdings by U.S. corporations. Corporate inversions are very much in the news today, very much part of the political landscape. A tax credit or complete tax forgiveness of anything that would go for bona fide R&D could increase, in our view, total biomedical research spending and probably all technology spending by at least 50%, and could fund it for about 10 years. Second, one could create a new class of bonds, again, long-term, the analogy of how we build stadiums or roads or create local incentives through tax-free mechanisms. One could do that for biomedical research. Closely allied to that is a suggestion that there could be innovation trusts, which could be very much like the Vice President's moonshot for cancer, where a particular disease, say autism or schizophrenia or Parkinson's disease or any kind of cancer, or cancer generally, could be bundled in an economic and research package that could be mounted by universities, by companies on a large scale, and certainly by the National Institutes of Health. There is a precedent for that in the Accelerating Medicines Partnership, which is a collaboration of a number of large pharmaceutical companies who initiated the project with the National Institutes of Health to focus on areas of science that industry cannot do by itself, that the NIH cannot do by itself, but that requires a cooperative effort organized adroitly with funding provided primarily by industry. Those are three ideas. There are many others that others have suggested, and there is no clear single formula. However, the challenge for us is to continue the improvement in life expectancy of this and every other country. It has tangible economic value and, of course, immeasurable human value. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. So I'd like all of you to get your questions ready. We'll have about half hour of Q&A, and then at 4:30, we'll break for coffee and cookies and have a chance to mingle with the participants. So as you are thinking through questions you'd like to ask, let me just pose one or two, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. By the way, the report Dr. Moses was referring to was this one called The Anatomy of Medical Research, U.S. and International Comparisons, which I would commend to you all. It points out that the purchasing power of the NIH and life sciences has declined by 13% in real terms since the year 2004. So we're simply not getting enough funding for our researchers to get the grants they need. The average age of first grant for medical research in the United States has increased from 34 in 1970 to 42 today. And the longer it takes for them to receive grants, increasingly they're going offshore and contributing to a loss of competitiveness. But the question I wanted to ask, going back to my original remarks, the spirit of which was, as we, as America, want to put in place policies to make us more competitive, and countries around the world seek the same thing, we have to architect that global competition in a very thoughtful way to lead to win-win outcomes. And one way we can do that is by getting more collaborative efforts in medical research. I was struck by your comments about the Human Genome Project, because that was really a fantastic global effort in which countries around the world co-invested to create a new base of scientific knowledge, that about the human genome, which was made public to the world. And that created a platform for innovation and competition with which other private sector actors and enterprises from nations throughout the world could take that knowledge base and then look for markers for new therapies and new treatments. Are there other examples of this, whether it is in the brain, whether it's in high-performance computing? How can we collaborate globally to create a new base of scientific knowledge that we can compete on top of?
I'll take a stab at that question. Most medical research today that is aimed at basic discovery is conducted by individual investigators in individual laboratories in single universities or companies. Companies have done a better job of organizing across geographies within their own domains. They have done relatively poorly, with a few exceptions, such as the AMP program I mentioned, collaborating with one another. However, the landscape is changing substantially, because individual investigators in universities and individual companies by themselves are largely ineffective. Certainly ineffective at turning the crank faster, of shortening that period of 15 to 25 years. But they were also ineffective at finding the correct answers, even if it were to take longer, because the scale required is much greater. The analogy here is with particle physics. Nobody does particle physics in an individual lab, with a few exceptions. But for the most part, the discoveries at grand scale require CERN, itself a collaboration of dozens of countries, where people go, where physicists go, and mathematicians go to collaborate. There is no such analogy in biomedical research. They have been proposed, but never implemented. On the other hand, the individual researcher at a single university is increasingly brought into international study groups. The funding of those is the major challenge, not so much the organization. They can be organized like the Human Genome Project, although that required a fair amount of bureaucratic judo to pull it off. The funding was the issue, and again, there it was largely a cooperative international effort.
Dr. Williams.
Engineering is a global profession. Engineering companies are often multinational. Our students are multinational at all research universities. We expect our students to graduate and understand that the field that they're in is an international field. Hundreds of our students study abroad. We have partnerships with dozens of universities around the world. Last year, 4 of our students had internships in Shanghai with a company after a semester of work for credit at Shanghai Jiaotong University. And that's just one example. This is repeated across all the research universities in the nation. So we know that educating our students to work in the international world is an essential part of what it takes to get just your bachelor's, never mind your master's or PhD. At the higher end of the degree scale, research is equally international in the way that we just heard in the medical field. International partnerships funded by federal agencies drive an extraordinary amount of research already, and there will be need for more of that in that $68 billion that we're waiting for. So.
I'll just add to, when it comes to international collaborations, I think United States has more programs than most of the countries to give an access to different countries, scientists, researchers, but yet I think at policy level, we all would benefit from some improvements that would reciprocate it. Let's say you look at the bird flu or swine flu cases, and one of the major challenges we had gaining access to the local materials, doesn't matter which country it would be, Indonesia, Malaysia, China, and that really not only to the detriment of the country itself, but to the global detriment, because this viruses might spread as a fire. So having some of that in place to speed up the things would be great.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that there's a lot of collaboration as well as competition in the HPC space. Most of the system software that's run on high-performance computing today is a global collaboration on Linux and derivative tools, compilers, code development environments, programming models, and I/O functions. There's a broad set of applications that are developed by open source communities where that community has members from around the world, and I think the biomedical research that you were talking about is a prime example of that. You know, where we could have a phase transition in our thinking and help the problem of speeding up biomedical research so that the ROI period is a factor of 10 better, is, you know, focusing more of the biological R&D into application model development as opposed to just wet science that is published without any digital surrogate to go along with that. And, you know, an example of that is a chemical model of the cell, extremely complex. You know, genomics, proteomics, interactions with the cytoplasm and the external environment, aqueous solution in blood and so forth. And all the chemical pathways that are in there are currently being teased out one at a time by researchers, right? Without a lot of deep understanding of all the other chemical pathways that are also coming to play. It's a very complex nonlinear system. If we started building as a global project, for example, a model of the cell where everybody was contributing in these bio pathways as they got discovered, we could very quickly change the current situation of not being able to analyze new experimental data in isolation, but we could compare it to what the model predicts of this very complex system, and thereby, basically standing on on each other's shoulders as we develop this process. That would be, a huge lever to increase the productivity and shorten the time for discovery, but it would require an international collaboration. The problem is that difficult.
Fantastic. Technology transfer and commercialization is one of the most important policy areas for any countries to get right. As Congress now begins to consider reauthorization of the Small Business Innovation Research Program as it looks to the America Competes Act, are there recommendations you would have for policymakers about specific things we can do to facilitate technology transfer from America's universities, research institutions, and national laboratories to the private sector, whether perhaps it's expanding funding for the National Science Foundation I-Corps program like the budget yesterday called for, or perhaps phase 2B type programs for more commercialization activities and SBIR grants, any things you see that would help transfer and commercialization?
Technology transfer is an area about which no one is pleased. Not industry, not universities, certainly not scientists, and rarely investors. The notion that something is discovered in a lab and can be immediately commercialized is a fantasy. It doesn't happen in any scientific engineering or technical area. Rarely does it. It occasionally does, but not predictably. And the sad truth is that most university technology transfer operations do not break even. They lose money. But the real difficulty is very few technologies stand in isolation. About 20 years ago, one of my early consulting projects was for a diagnostic device manufacturer that had a very simple problem of how to fabricate a device, but ran into a series of about 60 conflicting patents and patent holders, which caused them to abandon the entire operation. Therefore, the policy prescription is to provide some incentives for pooling intellectual property and to permit multiple universities to pool their intellectual property, and also to encourage companies to do the same, particularly in areas where there are key patents that are blocking patents. This is a very complicated area. And intellectual property itself is one of the non-tariff barriers that your report identifies. It warrants another afternoon entirely.
Yeah.
The Bayh-Dole Act decades ago initiated the rush of universities to translate their research into intellectual property, again with the myth that there were large pots of gold at the end of the rainbow. And part of that has stifled the interest in universities in pursuing IP. What we have found at Ohio State is that, in particular in our partnerships with industry, to get that issue out of the way up front, we acknowledge that when industry brings us problems, industries have spent millions, billions of dollars on whatever they are manufacturing, a jet engine at GE Aviation, a car at Honda, and so on. And anything that we do to tweak those designs or products, if we ever hint that we would like a fraction of their profits on each car or jet engine, the conversation ceases rather rapidly. What we do is simply to say, if you're coming to us to help you, you must acknowledge that we are bringing some intellectual property of value to you. Let's put an upfront price on that in the contract, and after that, we'll forget about it and everything is yours. And this has transformed our relationship with major companies such as I mentioned, because the acknowledgement is there of the intellectual value that professors and students bring, but we institutionally acknowledge that the value that the companies have in their decades of research and development and manufacturing is far beyond anything that we institutions bring to their value.
And I think the same applies to government investment as well. In order to get the IP rights, particularly from the DOE, there has to be a cost share mechanism, and it's a very complicated process, with literally years of negotiation that slows the process down. Another thing I'd like to add is that the human dimension to innovation and to expanding the use of HPC into new fields is that there are social aspects of, if you're going to be using a simulation technique to guide research, it's actually a different way to go about the scientific method. So people have to actually operate differently. They have to be valued differently, meaning, performance appraisals and pay and promotions at universities. I've seen lots of examples of this tech transfer of really great, stunning new technology developments. In fact, in the jet engine modeling and simulation area, we went from a 2D single physics package thing to like 15 different packages and a 3D model that simulated the engine over an entire flight at petascale. And that was not successfully transitioned to industry because of the business practices that were in place at the jet engine manufacturer, who was actually part of the project from the get-go, couldn't overcome to incorporate that new technology and the new business practices into their company. So I think that, as technologists, we think about the physics, the engineering, the medical stuff, but we also need to think about the human factor and the business factors and bring business schools into the loop in these collaborations, so that we figure out the transition mechanisms and the dynamism of change within corporations that is required to bring that about.
I mean, technology transfer is certainly a very complicated matter. When it comes to universities and the experiences we have, and where definitely some improvements are made, but we call there's a paper transfer and there's a real transfer. If you're talking about just signing a patent and have an agreement, that really doesn't mean that you transfer the technology. And having an access to human resources who actually can transfer that technology is a challenge, and acknowledge that it's very expensive to maintain such a base, but that's one of the major challenges. When it comes to international technology transfers, that is limited by different things. Let's say that you're transferring technology to Brazil, as you mentioned. Well, Brazil doesn't have access to all the reagents and equipment based on which we developed that technology. That makes it almost, you have to redevelop the technology on that basis. So there are some real challenges that goes beyond the science, and you have to have policies, you have to have access to equipment, et cetera. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. Any questions from the audience? Please, would you just state your name and who you're with? Our study did not look at that question explicitly, but I know that that is a topic that is of import to several of our panelists. I don't know, Mark, if you'd have any thoughts on the export control regime and how it relates to HPC, because that's certainly a trade issue with some of our partners.
Yeah, so, there's lots of export control restrictions around high-performance computing technologies. And, during the Cold War, that made a lot of sense because we had basically a 20-year head start on the rest of the world. Today, that's not the case. And as I mentioned, there are other countries out there, and every one of those countries on that list has told me personally that one of the major drivers for why they're doing that innovation with indigenous technology is U.S. export control policies. I'll just stop there.
Other questions? Well, I had at least one more for our panel while you're still thinking about it. You know, the true economic definition of competitiveness is the ability of a region to export more in value added than it imports without having to resort to mechanisms such as a currency manipulation or export subsidies. So genuine economic competition and value added. So if you look at what's happened to the U.S. manufacturing economy since the start of the Great Recession, we lost a total of 6 million high-wage, high-value manufacturing jobs in the 2000s. Since the end of the Great Recession in 2007, we have clawed back about a sixth of that, about 810,000 jobs. But unfortunately, our manufacturing value added still has not recovered to the level of 2007. So I think it's fair to say that the U.S. is not as competitive as we can or should be, certainly in manufacturing, maybe less so in other parts of the economy like ICT. But the question would be, what would be the #1 policy recommendation you would have for revitalizing U.S. manufacturing competitiveness? And do you see mechanisms such as this National Network for Manufacturing Innovation to be a core part of a public-private solution to that problem?
We are part of the National Network for Manufacturing Innovation, partnering with a very fine university to the north of Ohio that I'm not allowed to mention in public. Those at Michigan know what I'm talking about. We partner with a whole group of companies, 60 or 70 companies. We have opened a manufacturing center in Detroit, in downtown Detroit, because its need is far greater than Ohio's. And as a result, we have attracted investments, say, from dozens of companies from both Ohio and Michigan and many other states. And what this has done has allowed us to hire a very significant number of new faculty at both institutions, close to 100 faculty at Michigan and Ohio State in the area of manufacturing. And this has helped companies. Honda, as I mentioned, Honda North America, headquartered in Ohio, has come to Ohio State and said, we don't know how that we can manufacture the Accord of 2025 to meet the CAFE standards. We can manufacture very fuel-efficient cars, very few at a time. The NSX, which they are manufacturing, they produce 8 a day. And if you want to know how much it costs, you can't afford one. But this integrates the latest technologies, carbon fibers, magnesium, aluminum, differential materials. And the biggest problem of all is how you join them. And we happen to have the only welding engineering graduate school in the nation. So the joining of different materials is the future of lightweighting of automobiles and planes and so on. However, how do you take a process that you make 8 a day and turn it into one where you make 800 a day, which is necessary for the production of the saloon of the future rather than the high-end sports car? And that's only going to come about through innovative research, development, technology commercialization, and making use of the brightest young brains in the country that we have in our research universities.
So besides the economic ups and downs that are driving the manufacturing numbers, there's a recent trend that has emerged out of the maker movement and the introduction of 3D printing technologies, also known as additive manufacturing techniques, along with simulation science, believe it or not, has created a new industrial revolution that is democratizing manufacturing in a way that we haven't seen before. I was talking with some people from Alcoa. I don't know whether you guys noticed or not, but Alcoa just recently split itself into 2 companies. One they call the Fab, where they make stuff out of alumina and aluminum products, and the other one where they're designing new materials. And the reason they did that was that their major customers from the defense industry primarily were coming to them and say, we want you to make this new material thing where the customers own the IP for the materials as they came in, which left them a very low value proposition in terms of all they were was a fab at that point. So they've broken that up, and now they want to focus on creating new materials, designer materials, and the models that can be given to end users to put those new materials into designs and to have genetic algorithms actually do the mechanical design as well as the structural and material design of that based on genetic programming techniques. That is an example of this huge transformation in the manufacturing industry that democratizes and makes available to people in high schools, and biology is another example of people, being able to actually do genetic programming of biological cells in high school examples, where we could unleash crowd approaches to creating new technologies and new solutions that weren't available to us in the age where it took 25 years to do medical advances, where it took several billion-dollar factories to build a next-generation automobile and stuff like that. With these new technologies, we could lead in the creation of this new industrial construct and create a whole bunch of new classes of jobs for people who aren't traditional designers or product creators that could be enabled through these techniques.
That's great. Let me just ask one final question, and then I'll wrap up. But you can incorporate your comments, Dr. Moses, to this question. I was visiting with some entrepreneurs the other day, and I was struck by one gentleman who said that he's developing technology that can give 99.9% accurate detection of lung or breast cancer within 10 minutes. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think the data shows pretty clearly that a cure or an effective treatment for cancer could deliver $50 trillion in net present economic value to the global economy. Even a 1% reduction in mortality from cancer is estimated to produce $50 billion in economic impacts for the United States. So, I envy y'all working on these types of problems because they're fundamental for the human condition. But Dr. Moses, I want to read something which you wrote in this report because I think it's important. You say, some technology skeptics have even urged that the United States take a technology holiday for a decade, suggesting that the money saved be spent on ensuring that everyone receives existing preventative and therapeutic means, even if this slows scientific discovery. Now, I agree, we need to do all we can to get existing therapies to all citizens of the United States and of the world. But if we have this kind of attitude, whether it's in the life sciences that we need to slow technological innovation, or in engineering that automation and robots and artificial intelligence cost jobs, what are the risks for our economy and for U.S. leadership and competitiveness in technology and innovation-based industries?
That's an extremely topical question. You didn't tell us, however, did you buy the stock of the fellow who could screen for lung cancer with 99 plus? The statement that you read, we should take a technology holiday for a decade, was made somewhat in jest by the then retired former head of a large insurance company, health insurer. His point was that if we simply applied what is known today to all people, rich and poor, that would get us a very far distance in preventing disease and catching it early and intervening at a time when there was least cost and greater likelihood of effect. That was his point. But buried beneath that jocular comment is a very current issue that goes to the root of all of the political debate we have today. Is it income redistribution? Is it increasing the overall income of the country? Is it the public sector's responsibility to do that, or the private sector? All of those circle around the issue of the technology holiday. We are a technology-dependent economy. Technology captures the imagination of everyone. We are criticized as a country by even a number of Western European countries for being excessively preoccupied by technology and looking to technology for solutions that are fundamentally social or economic or have to do with values and culture. Now, whether that's a fair criticism or not will probably only be proven by history. But there is no question that from the purely economic standpoint, we are highly dependent on technology of one kind or another in this country. The cost of that is something that is apparent to those skeptics like the insurance executive who urged us to be more modest in our expectations.
Anyone else?
In very short, the holiday may cost us too much. We already have done in a number of areas. Stem cells could be one of them. And then trying to catch up is a lot more expensive.
Well, I think if there is one thing that ITIF's report clearly shows is that nations around the world are competing ever more fiercely to lead in innovation-based industries and doing all they can to attract, scale, and grow industries and enterprises in the highest value-added sectors of economic activity. The reality is that failure is never final, success is never permanent. So the U.S. must continue to be always attuned to the competitive strength of its economy. We're fortunate to have the Senate Competitiveness Caucus doing that for us with smart policies. And I want to thank a great panel today and to all of you for coming. So let's do a round of applause for our panel, and then please stay for coffee. All right, thank you very much. Join us for coffee and cookies, please.